The first session of our meeting today is with Professor Kevin Rafter, Chair Designate of the Arts Council, and I welcome both Professor Kevin Rafter and Orla McBride, who is the Director of the Arts Council, and I thank you for your attendance today. But before I ask you to address the meeting, I have to go through the statement in relation to the Defamation Act. I want to draw your attention by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act. Witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that the opening statement and any other documents you have submitted to the committee may be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Before I proceed, I'll ask people who are here in the audience as well as to turn their mobile phones off if they haven't done so thus far. So I now invite Professor Rafter to make his presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and the members of the committee for the invitation to meet with you today. I'm delighted at having been nominated by Minister Madigan to serve as Chair of the Arts Council, and I very much look forward to starting in that role shortly. I'll be the 10th person to hold this position since the Arts Council was established under the 1951 Arts Act. I think it's fair to say that no organisation plays a more important role in supporting the arts in Ireland than the Arts Council, and that position was set out in the original legislation in 1951, reaffirmed in the 1973 Act and again in the 2003 Act. As head of the School of Communications at Dublin City University, I currently lead Ireland's largest university centre for media and communications, with over 1,000 students recently rated amongst the 200 best globally in these subject areas. I was previously head of the Department of Film and Media at IDT Dún Laoghaire. Prior to 2008, I held several senior editorial positions with a number of media companies, including RT and the Irish Times, during a 14-year career as a political journalist. More recently, I've added significant experience as an independent non-executive director. I served 2 terms on the board of Dublin Bus until 2019, where I was also a member of the Audit and Risk Committee. And I've served on the boards of Oxfam Ireland and the Galway International Arts Festival, the latter organisation producing one of Europe's leading arts festivals, as well as developing and producing new work that tours nationally and internationally. I've experience working in the role of chair, including as chair of the Expert Advisory Committee of Culture Ireland, which is the responsibility for promoting Irish arts worldwide, and as chair of the Compliance Committee of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. And in that time, I've deepened my understanding of governance processes through ongoing training at the Law Society of Ireland and the Institute of Directors. I should note for the committee that in accepting the position of Chair of the Arts Council, I've also resigned from a number of these roles to remove any possible conflicts of interest. So my involvement in the arts and interest in the arts sector arises in part from my role in education and the education sector, from my involvement with Culture Ireland and as a board member of the Galway International Arts Festival, but also my long-standing personal interest in the visual arts, theatre, literature and film. In my previous career in the media, while I worked primarily as a political journalist, I also produced and presented a number of radio documentaries on visual artists. And going back a little further, although in truth that's probably a lot longer than a little further, I originally trained as an economist. My final year undergrad project was an econometric study of the price of the paintings of Jack B. Yeats, the findings of which I at this stage probably can't recall. And at that time I was also a volunteer on the community radio station in Dublin, Anna Livia, where I worked on the station's arts programme. In preparing for today, I read the Oireachtas debates on the original arts legislation from 1951. There was a second stage debate of the Seanad, where one member told the House, "The definition of artist nowadays is a man with long hair or a woman with short hair. They seem to need no other qualifications than that. When I see pictures exhibited by a lot of modern artists, I wish that we had no modern art. They are not paintings, they are not pictures. If anything at all, they are a puzzle." There's little in the contribution I suppose I would agree with, but...
Sorry, Professor Rafter. Chair, we have a vote, and I want to hear what Professor Rafter has to say, and it is a very important vote. And that's the only reason we're panicking a little here.
Right. If you wish, I can suspend.
I would really appreciate that, because I'm very interested, and it's very insulting. I'd like to hear what he has to say, but if he didn't mind, you know.
No, if it happens for...
Because that's a very important vote, and I'm voting against
your guest, the government. So
you don't mind, Professor?
Absolutely.
We will suspend till after the vote. It's only the single vote, is it?
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back in a few minutes.
That's the only reason we're back.
So we suspend. Bronor Marish,
Thank you, Chair. I was referring to the Oireachtas Seanad debates from the arts legislation in 1951, and a contribution from one of the members where he talked about contemporary art being a puzzle. And I suppose in a sense it should be. Art, be it a painting, a poem, a dance or a musical composition, should puzzle. It should challenge us as a people, make us think, reflect and inspire us. I'm a great admirer of the work of Michelle Rogers, a wonderful painter from County Louth, who lives now between New York and Rome. And in 2016 she was invited to sketch the signatories of the Paris Agreement at the United Nations. And in her drawings she sought to capture the hands of the 175 national representatives who signed the Climate Accord. And she said of the work that it was quite painful to do because it took hours, even though each individual signing only took 2 or 3 seconds. She wanted to draw every hand that she could. And the outcome was quick drawings of the signatures' hands. And it's been said the painting looks like a flock of birds. But it's art that captures history. And I think one of the successes of the Arts Council over the last 70 years or so has been in ensuring recognition for the critical importance of the artist in Irish society, acknowledging the intellectual, creative and imaginative contribution that artists make to Irish life. The Arts Council works tirelessly to ensure that artists are supported in all aspects of their artistic practice and at all stages of their careers. Individual artists are supported through a range of schemes, including bursaries, projects, Éamon and the Next Generation Award. However, the reality is that being an artist is a difficult and a precarious life. Despite the many available supports available through the Arts Council, more needs to be done to support the living and working conditions of artists, from performing to creative artists. And the Arts Council will have more to say about that in the coming months. In those Oireachtas debates in 1951, it was originally proposed that the amount of money provided for the new Arts Council would be limited to £20,000 per annum. Now, thankfully, following discussion in the Dáil, the financial provisions were changed so that no ceiling was to the amount of money granted to the Arts Council was put in place, and the Arts Council was also to be independent in allocating its funding. The then Taoiseach John A. Costello noted that this represented a fundamental principle in the legislation, and he said that art and all works connected with artistic activities, while being encouraged to the greatest possible extent by the state, should never be controlled by the state. In the period since those words were uttered, Ireland's international reputation as a creative country has been built on the long-standing state investment in both artists and arts organisations, overseen by successive arts councils. A small grant to a fledgling theatre company in Galway in the 1970s supported the development of the world-renowned theatre powerhouse that is the Druid Theatre Company. A bursary in the 1980s to a young emerging novelist named Anne Enright helped to lead to a Booker Prize winner and the inaugural laureate for Irish fiction. Several years ago, Anne Enright wrote about the lessons of being a writer. She had heard of people taking a year off to write a novel, and she thought, and I quote here, "I worry that a year might not be enough. You might fail as a writer for much longer than that before you know what failure is and what use you might make of it." Anne Enright admitted that she didn't realise when her first book fell apart that every book falls apart. And that's how she put it. As she put it, that's the gig of the artist. So in a way, it's remarkable that from such struggles, great work is so frequently created. At the Arts Council, novels are not written, poetry is not crafted, dance is not created. As a state body, the Arts Council is a body corporate imbued with a passionate love for, dedicated commitment to and a deep experience of all art forms. It disperses public money, provides expert advice and delivers practical support. Transparency and accountability are two hugely important values in all of this work. Key to the success of the Arts Council in delivering on its role is a capacity to work in partnership across government and with other partners, and in particular the local authorities. So partnership is important. Paul Durcan is one of my favourite poets. I was a university student when he published his collection Crazy About Women, which arose from an invitation from the National Gallery of Ireland to write poetry inspired by the gallery's collections. On my desert island list of things to bring, one of the first books would be Crazy About Women. It's a work of considerable beauty, and it always reminds me of the value of partnership. I also strongly believe in public access to the arts. Everyone in society should be able to have the unique personal experience that comes from the arts, of being inspired, challenged and confronted by the work of our artists. And people should be able to enjoy the arts in their local communities. Public access is central to the remit of the Arts Council, as is a strong commitment to providing experience and practice in different art forms for people across all of Ireland. The commitment is seen in support for over 48 local art centres, supported by the Arts Council all across the country. The positive impact of this type of activity is also evident in Arts Council funding last year for over 170 festivals attended by 500,000 people. But there are still communities for whom access to the arts continues to be a challenge for socio-economic reasons, for location, gender or for reasons of disability. So working to eliminate these barriers is and will continue to be a central priority for the Arts Council. Priority must be given to ensure that everyone living in Ireland has a sense of ownership of publicly funded art, and the art they encounter is relevant to contemporary society and its people. So, by way of conclusion, can I, as Chair Designate of the Arts Council, can I again thank the Chair of the Committee and the members for inviting me here today. I look forward to now formally taking up my role, and I also look forward to positively engaging with you in the future and to discussing many of the issues in this space with you again and at other opportunities. So, thank you.
Mar Cahirlach an Corla Lena tá Aodhán Ó Ríordáin. So KV Gary Keshton Akor and Shanador Marie-Louise.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Professor Rafter, and congratulations on your role as Chair Designate and now to be the Arts Council Chair. Just a few questions. You have a huge background in communication, in writing, in politics and media, and, as you say yourself, an interest and a background in arts from radio right through. There's a few questions here. What are the areas of the arts, as an outsider coming in, but not an outsider, that you think we need to concentrate on, that you would see there is a moment there that needs an extra concentration, or we should look at this? You mentioned some of them at the end of your piece there. Maybe just elaborate on that. Question 2. Should the Arts Council have a role outside its state role of the acknowledgement of the arts and the gift of finances and the gift of, platforms for projects and people? Should it have a role outside that? Would you see that in the future it should have? Is it a little stuck in where it is? Would you like to see changes there? You also say that being an artist is a difficult life. We've had many artists in here, starting with a lot of actors, in from the Abbey recently with what was happening there. But many people who come in from film and from the background of arts speak about the fact that it's really not a full-time job, that it's not a job you can actually take up as a career. You mentioned this, and you say that the Arts Council might have things to say about that in the future. Can you just elaborate a tiny bit on that, because you mightn't want to say too much on it yet. You mightn't have that worked out.
With the sound, so somebody
Is
has
there?
a phone on.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. What of the arts in Ireland and of all of the art forms do you think is the most neglected, or do you think is the most left behind, or it's not as evident both for young and old. If you had a magic wand today, what might be the first thing you'd do as the chair? Because I believe well, arts is about magic, about creating, I suppose, the other in people. So what would you do? What's your, in relation to third level education, STEAM and STEM? You know, that whole thing, you know, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And is there anything you've seen in your travels and your reading that happens in other countries that you as a chair, as the new chair, might like to open up the possibility? I'm not believe in copying, you know, I'm not in the business of copying, but that you might like to see paralleled here. Now, they're just kind of very general questions, because I know there's more to what you want to do, and they're also magic questions in the sense that you haven't sat down yet in the job. So just to give you a kind of a bounce.
Yeah.
Very much. Yeah, I haven't sat down in terms of chairing a board meeting. I'm chair designate, and I wanted to do the committee the courtesy of the first public outing. I do look forward to, I think there are a number of board meetings later this month, and that will be, I suppose, an opportunity for me to get my feet under the table and get a sense. But I'm not coming with you with a big long list of saying I'm going to do this, that and the other. I think my approach will be very much to watch, listen and see. I have had the benefit of being on the board of the Galway International Arts Festival and being chair of Creative Ireland, and that has given me a very good sense of the sector and of I suppose the different issues. So when you ask in terms of focus, Culture Ireland had a conference in January where there were individuals from all the different sectoral interests involved, and I think the one thing that I've picked up, you know, it is the role of the artist, and you know, ensuring, I suppose, that a fair and equitable working wage for artists, and to support artists through their careers. And that's from the performing artist to the creative artist. So if I can sort of dovetail or merge a number of your questions in terms of focus, I think that will be one of the issues, looking at from performing to creative artists, and doing something in that space so that people can have the time and the space. And I know I've had the benefit of reading some of your minutes, and I know you had Gary Hines in here earlier in the year as you were preparing your report on Arts Matters, and I think her contribution in terms of where she talked about, you know, allowing art to be made. So I think that the focus is in that space. The second thing then is obviously public access, as I mentioned in my opening statement. I think that is really important, that, you know, publicly funded art is available to all. It's available throughout the country. The Arts Council is a national institution, but it has significant regional reach. It's involved in, you know, funding in the education sector and in schools. It's in funding in relation to the art centres and the various festivals. So ensuring that, you know, people have access to art and publicly funded art. So in terms of the magic wand, I'm not going to, it's going to surprise you with my answer. It will be the funding model. The Arts Council, like all public bodies, suffered significantly during the post-2008 period. You know, when its funding in 2008 was 85 million, you know, it went down to 56 million, and, you know, there was a generous increase in the last budget and is now back at 75 million. But I think one of my objectives as chair, working with my colleagues on the council and with the director and the staff in the Arts Council, is to say that this is money well spent. You know, this is money well spent in terms of, you know, Gary Hines, again to quote, she talked about the art, the act of imagining, you know, and been challenged and been inspired. You know, that doesn't come without investment. So I think magic wand would be budget, and over the period, the 5-year period that I will hopefully be chair of the Arts Council, that budget will go significantly above its current level, because that allows to do the other things you're talking about. That allows, in relation to recognising the role of artist, the role of the artist, looking at careers. It allows to putting art into throughout the country and different regions. It allows to support, you know, art centres. So that would be the magic wand. In relation to the sort of STEAM and STEM, the debate, like the arts The humanities is hugely important in terms of the ability to think, the ability to inspire, to communicate. And it is central, I think, that we don't lose sight of the value. You know, I think it's the late Micheál O'Sullivan who said that there's no metric for the priceless. And sometimes we need to recognise that the huge value that arts and the arts provides to Irish society. But that doesn't come without investment.
Smith.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor, for being with us today, and to Orla. It's lovely to see us both here to talk to us about the Arts Council. So I have two kind of questions for you, Kevin. Perhaps you may or may not be able to expand on them, but we'll give it a shot anyway. Creative Ireland and the Arts Council. I want you to be very frank and honest and answer me the question: do you see any duplication in terms of the roles of Creative Ireland and what the Arts Council is doing? Do you see a conflict there? Do you see a duplication of the work that's been done that in some ways can distract from what the Arts Council is trying to do, or take away from what the Arts Council is trying to do? And my second question to you is about the Arts Education Charter. Do you intend to follow on the proposal that's in that document, which is for the local arts and education partnerships? Are you an advocate of those types of partnerships, and do you intend to deliver on those types of partnerships around the country, and that marriage, if you like, with the Arts Council, the ETBs and the local authorities? So two specific questions.
Yeah, and like in terms of, like, as chair of Culture Ireland and now as the chair designate of the Arts Council, you know, I'm aware there are different players doing different activities. So you know, yeah, but some of them, you know, in terms of the value of partnership and having specific organisations in specific areas. You know, Creative Ireland has a remit, particularly in terms of education. I will, I suppose, judge that as I become more familiar with the role, but there is a very good open relationship between the Arts Council and Creative Ireland. As an objective outsider looking in, as you have been to this point, do you see a problem? I don't see a problem. No, I don't see a problem. I see, in terms of two organisations, and the Arts Council obviously is, you know, in statute, has, you know, very specific remit in relation to promotion and encouraging the arts. Creative Ireland has a time-specific programme of activities, particularly the Creative Schools Initiative, you know, where it works in conjunction with the Department of Education and the Arts Council. And I think in terms of there's a lot of activity in the art spaces that you and your colleagues know. So are you confident and are you satisfied that their roles and remits are completely different, and that they're not, that Creative Ireland is not duplicating what the Arts Council was set up to do? Are you satisfied about that? I am, but I'm happy to come back when I'm 6 or 9 months in the role and answer your question more fully. I think you might be able to answer it more honestly as you know, from the outside looking in, because I've always had concerns.
He hasn't taken up.
Oh, I know. I'm just. And I'm not been evasive in your role, and you know, even in terms of the briefings that I've done over the last number of weeks, and you know, preparing for today, there's a huge remit of activity that the Arts Council is involved in, and you know, part of the role of an incoming chair is to watch, listen, and see. And today, you know, I may not have all of the answers in the detail that, you know, I would have if I was, you know, 12 or 18 months into the role. There are, you know, a variety of different organisations in the space, but you know, the Arts Council is the most important, has been for nearly 70 years. It's the premier dominant organisation, and it's the one that has the biggest reach. Okay, and then on the Arts Education Charter?
Yeah, the Arts Council is significantly involved in the education sector, and that is something in terms of, I talked in my contribution about the value of partnership, and that the partnership with the Department of Education is something that has developed over the last number of years. And I think in terms of, like, if you take, you know, the Creative Schools Initiative, there's 300 schools in that space. That's a project that, you know, the Arts Council involved in will continue to be involved in. So I would say yes. I think the Arts Council can't work on its own. It works through the local authorities. It works with the line department. It's hugely important that, you know, we're not all in silos. So those partnerships are vitally important to deliver what is the ultimate objective in terms of the arts community and in terms of the public, in terms of their access.
Thank you very much.
Senator Warfield.
Yeah, congratulations on your appointment. One of the things I'm hearing in the discussion is the funding model and the individual artist. according to yourselves, according to Theatre Forum, according to the artists, 400 artists or people involved in the arts, to the Abbey Theatre, according to Visual Artists Ireland, the average wage of an artist is between 12 and 13,000 euro. So as funding increases, as we might expect it to, we're faced with a choice about whether to, continue to support projects that don't raise the living standards or the security or the income of artists. And before my time in arts policy or in a portfolio related to the arts, I know the Arts Council funded theatre companies and they were funding projects, but what if, we had a conversation around a living wage for artists where you give the money to an individual artist. Maybe they have to earn in their own right 5,000 to 8,000 euro a year, but that they would be compensated up to a living wage, and whatever income they earned, the lower level of compensation would be paid by yourselves. And at the guaranteed level, i.e. the living wage, no compensation would be paid by the state, and that would essentially recognise and reward exactly that, the unrecognised period that artists spend on their work, and address the levels of poverty in the sector, because 12,000 and 13,000 euro is poverty. We were having the conversation about poverty ourselves, but is that a viable funding option, do you think?
I think you're entirely correct in relation to wage levels. The Arts Council's current strategic plan, Making Great Art Work, talks about supporting artists through their careers and talks about a fair and equitable payment for the work that they do. And this issue has obviously been in the public domain considerably over the last period. It's an issue that I've heard and discussed as Chair of Culture Ireland with individual artists, and it's something that I, in my opening statement, because I believe that it's something that needs to be addressed. Obviously, Aodhán is there in relation to creative artists, and a figure, I think it's about 17,000 a year is the stipend that the members receive. But there are gaps, and there's particularly in the performing artists area where somebody can be working for a number of months, and they may be on your TV screens and you think, God, they're doing really well. And then, but there's no work for the rest of the year. So that's a gap, and I think that is something that, as incoming chair of the Arts Council, I would like to discuss. And I've discussed with the director already that is something that we may look that we should and we will be looking at. So I think you're entirely correct. It is about ensuring that those periods when there is no work, that people can they can continue their practice, be that on the stage, on the screen, or the visual artist. So, and I know a report that you published yourself a number of years ago raised some of these issues. So, in terms of the two things that I've put in the opening statement, one is about the role of the artist, from performing artist to creative artist, and the second is about public art. So yes is the answer. And obviously, if more money becomes available to the Arts Council is in a position then to do more things. So the existing schemes can be expanded and new schemes can be considered.
I think it's immensely important if we want to make sure it's not just a playground for the privileged, and if we want to look after the health and well-being of artists, and it's possible that more and better work would be created by individuals. You're obviously then faced with an argument about why, a lone parent in any community across Dublin shouldn't be given exactly the same. But I think this is a conversation that's happening, and then also the social welfare, it would be separate from that, but I think in your role you should, and I would encourage Orla to do it as well, to reach out to other departments, not just the Department of Culture, and to have those conversations. Social protection, and popular music is something that comes up time and again, so it's just something separate, that the that popular music isn't covered by the Arts Council. Maybe either of you could talk about that.
Well, like in terms of the areas of art, the 2003 Act specifies what the areas of activity are in terms of defining arts, but it can be broader than that. And I've read and I've seen the discussions around other art forms that are not currently covered. And again, I think it is an issue that I've sort of a list of things and that to ask questions of. And like I, as chair, will work with my 12 colleagues on the council. So I'm not in a position to impose. But there are a range of issues, from a living working wage to the different art forms that I want to discuss with the other council members and see where we go as in the next period of activity for the Arts Council. And what you've asked in relation to popular music is not something that it strikes me as something for the first time I've heard it here, and it is on the list to say, right, is this something that we should also be expanding the reach? But I think a lot of it does come back to looking at the budget. I think with a bigger budget, last year's increase was significant, but it's still only putting it marginally above it still hasn't put it back to where it was in 2008. And okay, every organisation wants to go back to where it was in 2008, but where more resources are available, it's a small amount of money in terms of the overall national budget to go into the arts, which would allow to deal with the type of issues you're addressing and bring arts into the communities, because it's not just the privilege that are enjoying the arts, like the 50 national tours were supported by the Arts Council last year, and that work went across the country. 300,000 people attended and enjoyed those performances. And as I mentioned, in relation to the range of festivals, 170 festivals, and 500,000 people. So the Arts Council, is in every community, and its funding is in every community. But with a bigger budget, you can have a bigger impact, and you can do more things.
Senator O'Donnell.
Yeah, can I ask something?
I would just stress maybe that we shouldn't always overstate the reach of the Arts Council as well. The culture is created in homes and in schools, and most of it goes on outside of the reach of the Arts Council. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Just supplementary, of course, most of it all will. One of the things that I found in 2008 anyway, there's an awful lot of money spent. We had a lot of money sloshing around, but a lot of it was spent on more building sometimes more than the creative artists actually creating things or actually performing. Can I just ask, I'm very interested in arts and the elders, obviously because I'm getting there myself and I'm probably a visual age, Not really, well maybe. And the arts and disadvantaged. You mentioned that, and as you know, Kevin, I was 25 years up in DCU, so I know what the community means up there and what arts means to the community and vice versa. Arts and health, arts and equality. I have a theory, and I don't know whether you might like to think of this, along with 1,000 other things you'll have to think about. I really think the Department of Arts should be a separate department. I think it's so huge if you start naming. I've always talked about this, naming the cats, be they arts, drama, theatre, dance, music, language, performance, media. Start with puppetry, and end with Picasso or the ballet Prokofiev. It was on the stream the other day, Romeo and Juliet, Prokofiev. And I think I keep saying this because we're the beekeepers here now, and they're kind of, they're not in competition, but they have to vie, and a natural environment has to vie, whereas language and maybe arts would sit far better. And I think you might think about that, because I think you could make more noise in a very cultural way. And it also will extend your budget as well as that. It mightn't create a separate department, but because there was once a time we had an arts and culture and language department, and I think that gives you an independence of all the things you're talking about and the extensions. And so if I was giving you, not advice, but maybe to make more noise around that, or if you felt that was a good idea, and also arts in all of the different departments, because it's just so integrative. As you were calling it a partnership, but it's actually so integrative, within everything.
I can say I'm open to hearing all advice, because there are good ideas. I don't have a monopoly on ideas. Capital expenditures for the department. So in terms of the Project Ireland 2040 programme. I think there's about not shy of about £500 million going into projects such as national cultural institutions, the National Library, the National Archives, but the Crawford Gallery in Cork. So it's a mixture across the department. The Arts Council then is obviously current expenditure. I think you're entirely correct in relation to disability, disadvantage, people who experience barriers in terms of access. And as our demographics change and as the population greys in terms of age profile, that is something that we need to be conscious of. There will be more people will be living longer, and also hopefully their ability to enjoy that time will mean that they will be able to visit national institutions. They can go to the national the gallery, or they can go to the Crawford in Cork and see great works of art. So we need to be conscious of that as well, and the facilities that will be available for people. But yes, in terms of disability and disadvantage, as I mentioned in my statement, that is on the radar.
But the arts and the elders are very interesting, because it's not just about visitation and about looking at art and going to art and hearing art. It's also about the integrative aspect of it. If you look at the Macaulay Place in Naas for Elders, it was a creative model used there, not a medical model. That was the standpoint. And I think that's a kind of the standpoint we need to get to in a lot of things. This is a creative model that we're going to use here, and then all things will flow from that. So anyway, I wish you the best of luck. I think it's a tremendous challenge, and it's a great feast as well of what's great about Ireland. You won't be stuck up with us doing legislation that could tie you down to a bed sometimes. It's so boring. Would you agree? At least.
Well, I'm so mabhuicas go all live us bad show. My hair fenda tassulagum gemeg shiv agdiro stacker gwelg agus na halian koma ta 5 in the morning chin agus ta nis more argile tasa. I want also that you continue the relationship that we've started today with the committee. We mightn't be here, but there will be a committee dealing with the arts at in future incarnations. We might be here, but just that I think at least once a year that kind of yourself and Orla would come before the committee to explain progress or lack of progress or whatever. And I think that's a useful. It's useful to force us in some ways, because as Senator O'Donnell has just said, our remit in this committee is quite vast, and we're bouncing from one area to another, and sometimes it helps if we focus, and with the Arts Council coming before us once a year, hopefully. And that you also see this as a vehicle in which to express sometimes frustrations with the system, or whichever way you wish. So kind of whether it's come before us when the annual report is published and use that as the vehicle, I think that should continue. So creating one cogardas igualat agus ganairi lat agus shinrata delame uns quitchud and session occur. So we will adjourn just for a few seconds, suspend while we kind of allow the guests to switch over. And if I can ask, it's probably no harm if we take a photograph, kind of just for ourselves, just the committee and yourselves. I never put up the photographs, by the way, so I'm just saying. I think it's useful just that it's done. Mark an occasion. We have film of it. So we're in public session. So the topic in this session is the current threat of extinction of 1/3 of the Irish native bee population and related matters. So we're going to discuss that, and I am pleased to welcome from the Federation of Irish Beekeepers Association Mr. Ken Norton, PRO, the President, Paul O'Brien, and one of the beekeepers, Peter Walsh. But before I ask you to address the meeting, I have to draw your attention to the fact, by virtue of Section 17(2)(L) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to that effect, that where possible you should not criticise nor make any charges against any persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. I also wish to advise that the opening statement and any other documents you have submitted to the committee may be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So, Mishglam are Kitaig Tusnu, Paul O'Brien come. Paul O'Ken, is it?
No, Paul O'Brien, President of the Federation of Irish Beekeepers.
Tussi Gannis, Uachtaran, Paul O'Brien.
Thank you for allowing us to speak here today. During the 1960s and the 70s, Ireland was known as the land of milk and honey throughout the world. In 2019, we still produce milk, but not much honey. Over the years, much of our uplands and hedgerows have disappeared, and we very seldom see wildflower meadows anymore. All these changes have seen a reduction in the amount of wild native bees at a time when we should be ensuring greater protection of the vulnerable insects. As Ireland prides itself as a green island with wild tourism and green agriculture, we should be more protective for nature in our country. At a time when all wildlife, including bees, need all the help they can get, it is now a time for us all to sit together and discuss concerns about managing our uplands and hedgerows and come up with a positive solution to minimise the conflict with nature. I'll speak from the heart. We have a major problem at the moment with the decline of not only our habitats, our plant and fauna, our bees, our birds and our wildlife. And as citizens of Ireland and citizens of the world, we are given the land by way of a loan from preceding ancestors, and we must hand it back to the next generation in as good as we got it, without destroying it any further. Ireland prides itself on its green image, and yet our habitats are disappearing. Whereas before we could keep 60, 70 beehives, as elderly beekeepers have told me up and down the country, they cannot keep that many anymore because there's no food. The hedgerows are protected, but there's no stipulation on how the hedgerows are to be cut. And the habit has started in Ireland where they're cutting them right down to the root and then using mechanical diggers and machines to split the roots, which doesn't allow the hedgerows to grow back. Now, Teagasc has been very supportive with the Federation of Irish Beekeepers, and we brought out a good document last year together on how to manage and cut hedgerows. But as there's no legislation, again, mechanical diggers are removing the hedgerows and they're not growing back. If we lose the insects, we lose the birds, we lose the green image. The canary in the mine was brought down years ago, and when it died, we knew we had to get out of the mine. The bees are dying. They're telling us something. If we don't listen, we're letting down the future generations. Thank you.
Does anybody want to say anything else? So I'll ask the committee members, and they'll ask questions. So any of you can kind of answer, just indicate. So, Peadar Tóibín. Seán Smyth.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to the committee here today, and we have your how-to guide here in front of us as well. I think it's well accepted, the points that you're making here today, I suppose, about our biodiversity and how we are the custodians of the land, and we have a huge responsibility to hand it on to the next generation. And of course the bees are a huge part of that biodiversity. So I'm just wondering, in terms of us as a committee, and I'm asking you very frankly and very honestly, I mean, apart from what we can do as individuals with our own gardens and preserving meadows and stop cutting our grass and stop cutting our hedges and all of that, what can we do as a committee to, I suppose, further the plight that you come to this committee with today in terms of the bees themselves as one aspect of the biodiversity of our country?
Thank you for your question. What we'd ask you all to do is, we have this act about the hedgerows and how they're cut and managed. What we'd ask you now is to bring in the next round of legislation to say that they cannot be cut to an inch of their life, that there should be a guidelines, a document, if not law, that they cannot be removed right down to the root where they have no chance of growing again. So a criteria as to how to cut them, and not to let them be cut without that criteria, because it's been destroyed. We'd also ask you to curtail the use of pesticides. They're being used because some gardeners might have a couple of dandelions, so they bring out the best chemical in the world that they think is Roundup and other chemicals of that nature, neonicotinoids. But the damage they do is unbelievable. We have a good working relationship with the farming community. We do ask them to notify the beekeepers in their area when they go spraying, because we know they have to spray. We accept all this. But if they tell us when they're doing it in the daytime, we can put the bees in for that day, close the door on them, not let the bees out. They won't come in contact with the pesticides, they won't die, and they'll survive. But there's no legislation asking them or inviting them to tell us. These are little areas where a little incentive. Now, I know the farmer has to make money and the landowners have to make money, so the next round of cap reform or agricultural payments, it could be put into the stipulation that hedgerows are protected to a certain criteria, that spraying is notifiable to the beekeepers in their area. We've 63 associations in the country. It would take one email shot to tell that area, Mr. Brown or Mrs. Brown is going to spray the area tomorrow morning, and the beekeeper in that area could protect their livestock and their bees. They're simple little things, but they won't do it on their own. So they're going to need a gentle push or an encouragement, whichever is the norm.
Yeah, so it's about opening up those lines of communication and recognising the bees, almost your farmers, your custodians of the bees, and having that communication with you locally on the ground.
Yes, but they need that incentive, whether it's a financial incentive or a carrot or a stick, whichever, and that's, as you as legislators, we'd ask you to encourage one of the two, whichever it is, to make sure that they're small things, they're simple to do. You know, a little pamphlet that says you can't cut the hedge beyond these limits or this size or that structure, and if you're spraying, please notify the farmers that's something you need to do. And it's a small incentive.
We also need the All-Ireland pollinator plan to be adopted by as many county councils as possible. Now, one example would be County Louth. They have adopted it fairly recently, and all the roundabouts are now turned into a wildflower meadow, which is helping all sorts of pollinators, so it's an excellent idea. Plus, we should be encouraging the Tidy Towns competitions, Tidy Towns participants to get more involved in the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, because, as we said before, or as you know yourself, 75% of what we consume needs to be pollinated, not necessarily by bees, but by some pollinator. So if we stop doing that, shall we say, if all the pollinators died tomorrow, it's not a question that we would die. We would then be left with 25% of stuff which doesn't need to be pollinated. So we would end up with a very limited diet. So we would die eventually, or rather quicker, because we would be left with a limited diet, so we'd be getting sick more often and so on. So we need to protect the 75% which we're talking about.
Before Senator O'Donnell comes in, will you explain what the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan is?
Sorry, yeah, the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan was drafted up in 2015, which runs to 2020. So it was put together in connection with the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So the Federation, which is ourselves, would be one of the signatures to it, Board BIA, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, plus the Heritage Council. So there are various other organisations which are funded by the government which would be involved. So what happens is they would go around to various events, so would we, explaining about hedgerows for pollinators, creation and management of a wildflower meadow, creating wild pollinator nesting habitat, plus getting the farming community involved to plant more plants and flowers on the farmlands. So it's to encourage everybody to get involved. This is the whole thing now. There's also the initiative has been rolled out into schools and colleges as well. So there's a junior version, there's all sorts of versions, and you can go onto the website pollinator.ie. So most of the stuff is all free there. You can download it, print it out, or you can get a hard copy as you wish. So that would be the main issue we would be having, that if it can be promoted more. Initially when it came out first, it was in papers every day of the week, on the television, all that sort of thing, but obviously like everything then, funding ran out, so it's now just pops up every now and again. But it's still, it needs to be in the public's face, shall we say, so as they can see what to do. Don't cut your grass every 2 minutes. It's not a football pitch that you have. Let your weeds grow. They're a benefit to some insect. So
through the Chair, can I just ask a question? Ken, that's a 5-year plan you talked about there, the National Pollination Plan.
It is, yeah.
And we're coming to the end of it, obviously. So have there been any deliverables in that?
Sorry?
Has there been any sort of tangible deliverables that you can say?
Oh, there has been, yeah. There has been a lot of uptake on it, you see. But the main issue, I would say, is if the local county council would pick up on it,
push it,
it'd be a huge benefit.
And is your,
now, some of them have.
That they haven't been?
Some of them have. Now, it's very limited, the amount that have picked up on it. Okay. So we would need as many as possible to pick up on it.
Okay. Well, just let me ask a few questions, and if they come across as remedial, forgive me, but it's really to get to the root of some of this. How bad are we in Ireland in relation to what you're talking about? Where do we fare? That's the first question. You know, where do we fare? Maybe we'll just answer them one by one, because they're quite disparate, Chair. How bad are we in relation to other countries? Are we faring anywhere bottom of the line or middle of the way, or in relation to what you're talking about, which is the preservation, really, of our land, as you say, and of our environment?
At the moment, we have probably the best hedgerows still in existence.
In existence.
In existence. But the rate of destruction, for want of a strong word.
And who is responsible for that, Paul?
The Teagasc have worked tirelessly with the farming community, and have, as I said, with us as well, and the pollination plan, to bring out a booklet on how to manage hedgerows correctly. But the trouble is, the farmers, in the best will in the world, are using the opportunity, as I said, to cut the hedges right down. They cannot recover from that. Now, they have their profitability of getting as much pasture land going to get the dairy industry going, and they want to get every square inch of it. Unless there's an incentive, maybe in the CAP programme or somewhere like that, there's an incentive back to give them back. As we had discussion outside, there was a 1,000-acre farm up the country, and for him to give back the linear acre, which would be the hedgerows, he'd be losing 2 or 3 acres, or maybe 10 acres out of his 1,000, and he couldn't do it. He just it's not profitable enough for him to do that. So this is what we're up against. The county councils, only very few of them have taken the pollination plan on board and have brought it.
Very few of them, yes. Have done what?
Taken the pollination board plan
you mentioned
board.
County Louth, so some of them have been very slow.
Some of them are very, very slow and have kind of ignored the matter totally. There's no planting.
Because surely that would be, Paul, the place to start, because the county councils are the locale. We're kind of sitting here representing a lot of things. I personally legislation, but would that not be the place to start? Or are they ignoring you, or are they just being lazy?
They're being lazy. They have all received this. They've all been made presentations too about the pollination plan, but they're being lazy. And I don't disregard that you are the public face. People hear and see ye quite often. And ye are the legislators. So ye are the encouragement. You can pass it down. We've tried from the bottom up, but we need to get the top down as well, to get people to get involved.
So what do you think that, as a legislator, I should do now?
I'd like to see guidelines, either, as I said, with a carrot or a stick, about the managing of hedgerows, not the total destruction of them. This is a huge problem up and down the country.
And did this come up on the doors of the local elections? Because we had the Greens everywhere, so at least there was a...
We have, and let's be honest, everywhere you read, look now, you're hearing about the bumblebee and the honeybee. We have got into the press, but there's only so much we can do by publicising it.
Okay, that's the first question. Just tell me what happens if we've no bees. Well, if the bees just decrease and decrease and decrease, just line it down.
It's very, very simple. You go into your local supermarket tomorrow morning, and every single fruit and veg that you see with a colour is pollinated by a pollinator. And bees are dedicated. When I say bees are dedicated, let's take a field of oilseed rape. The bees will come out of their hive and they'll spot the oilseed rape and they'll say, lovely, they'll spot the oilseed rape, yeah, and say, that's a lovely source of food. Every single bee will continuously go back to them flowers till they're fully exhausted of nectar. So they are dedicated pollinators. A bumblebee will come along and say hello to a flower and go to the next field and the next field. Honeybees go all the time back to the same food source till it's exhausted. That's why they're their primary pollinators. Now, go back into your supermarket, there's no bees, all the coloured fruit and veg is gone. So
when you say pollinator, what exactly do you mean?
Bumblebees, wasps, and honeybees.
What are they doing?
They're going from one flower to the next flower, bringing pollen from one flower to the next flower, and fertilising all the rest.
Fertilising.
Fertilising.
See, sometimes people use this language, but they don't actually understand the breath, yes, the breathing of what the actual bee does, yes, for us to come along and eat it.
The reward for the bee is nectar, and the nectar is a very fine sugar solution dissolved in maybe 80% water. When they bring it back to the hive, they hydrate it right down to 20% of water, which gives us the honey that we all delight.
And when you said that 75% is pollinate, what you said 75% pollination.
The
food that we eat out of the supermarket.
Give me another example.
Oranges gone, bananas gone, tomatoes gone, strawberries gone, all of them gone. Your diet would be very simple. It would be cabbages, root vegetables, and wheat. Very interesting diet.
You see, kind of, yeah. Do you think, when I was saying earlier on, because of the way we are destroying our environment, if you start with plastic in the seas and the effluent recently in Dublin South, where people can't swim now because all the poo is going into the sea, and etc., do you think that I'm crazy if I was to say that we really need a natural environment single department now because of the destruction that we have that would encompass what you're talking about as well?
Well, it's very simple. If you go out over the last year, who are the people on the street that are so passionate at the moment? It's the children. They don't want us to hand back an environment that's destroyed. And we are in charge. Every one of us, as anybody over the age of 30, is responsible for what happened in the past. Now, we can't go back over the Industrial Revolution. We have to look after what we have today. You're of the same vintage as I am. And when you drove across the country many years ago, your windscreen was covered in insects. You can drive from here to Galway and you might see 2 insects. We
certainly won't see them on your windscreen, which is where you used to see them.
No, we've been excellent at removing all the insects. We're doing a great job of it, but we have to stop.
You see, people live in a kind of a contradictory environment too, because they drive across Ireland, you know, and they think, my God, look at Ireland, it's magnificent and it's green and it's emerald and it's all of that. And they don't lock in sometimes to the reality of what you're saying, because they don't really think that these pollinators are essential to what we eat and how we eat.
Every single thing that we live with is essential. If you take out one snail or one bee or one bird, it has a catastrophic effect on other animals. Look at the report yesterday about the diversity of plants and fauna. It's disappearing. So we can stop one thing today. We can help it to assist it.
But do you not think it should be a prerequisite of all county councils that they answer what you're saying, not just Louth, but that other county councils, that it should be a statutory requirement that they answer what you're suggesting here?
I think it should be a statutory requirement that they do incorporate in their planting and in their landscaping and in their planning permissions, somewhere along that, respite or oases for pollinations and for birds and bees.
Okay.
A number of questions myself, so if you want to come back after that. I think it would be useful for us if we had a list of the county councils and that have signed up to it, and it might be useful on your website if it's not already there to highlight, because that allows the young people you're talking about and those of us who are passionate to put pressure on councils. All of us are in political parties, well, some aren't, but our colleagues to say we need the council to act, and that they can use their new mandate to try and.
I'll undertake to do that.
Yeah. Second of that, there's in the city here. There's a lot of there is a movement towards a lot more allotments. So, for instance, my own area, Bluebell, it's only just opened one. I got my keys last week. Haven't done anything, but with that, it's an area that obviously is encouraging people to grow. But unless, in my view, unless you have hedges around it or encourage bees in, you can have all the will in the world, but if it's in the middle of a built-up area and everybody is killing off the flies, the wasps, the bees, and whatever, by sprays and that, you're not going to have as good or an abundance of crop. So again, I know in my area, one of the things I was thinking about, and it came up with discussion with some of those who are on the allotments, is to try and get the council to encourage in the hedge or the fencing around these allotments to grow colourful flowers from that, to try and draw wild bees in. So it's something that we could do.
One of the things in the pollinator plan is the trees and the bushes to plant.
Yeah.
There's no point in planting trees that are just green leaves.
It's
Scotch wine is no good to
yeah.
anybody. It's ones that have some benefit.
So I think it was yourself, Ken, mentioned about the funding, or somebody mentioned the funding running out.
Yeah.
So have you made a submission looking for an additional wad of money to continue the work? Because I looked in preparation for this at some of the documents you have produced, and they're very useful.
They are, yeah.
As somebody who's uninitiated, if you want, and simple steps. So I'd encourage people to go onto the pollinators.ie site and have a look at the guides. But
well, I'll give you the guidelines. The Federation of Irish Beekeepers, we get €8,000 a year from the government.
Yeah.
We have
8,000. 8,000 to do their work.
And we have 3,500 members, and all of us here are all voluntary. We don't get, we give our time voluntary.
So again,
the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, you see, that's mainly being run by the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So we are in partnership with them, or several others. However, they're the top dogs, shall we say, so they would be seeking the funding. But we would be supporting them, but they would be seeking the main funding.
But given the crisis we're in, the organisations who are best placed to give advice to farmers, to schools, to whatever, need to be funded, whether it's yourselves or the National Biodiversity Plan or whomever. The funding, in my view, has to be given. The other point I had, it's something that I don't know whether there has been much, and we had discussed it here. Bordemona, a lot of their bogs, and there are other bogs which aren't belonging to them, are no longer being cut. Has there been much work to encourage the flowers or the ferns and whatnot to be grown again, to encourage? Because those areas were good.
They have approached us, and they want us to get involved in the replanting of a lot of the bogs and
offering. Yeah, because that's an area that's very important, I think. So
because that'll be a big belt of land in the middle of the country. If we could bring it back into that habitat, it'd be wonderful.
Yeah, no, and again, I think you draw up the plan, and if you need our good officers here in the committee or politicians in general. In the main, I think people understand. They mightn't be fully aware, and they mightn't understand the full consequences. But I think you have supporters there. And at the very least, I can talk for the people on this committee who've expressed an interest. We will have Birds Watch Ireland in in a number of weeks as well. And it's again, there's an understanding on this committee, and I think in general in the population, that there's a crisis point. So we either take action now, so where the state, because it's not just Bordemona, there's also the national parks, kind of there are, like Phoenix Park and all of those areas, and you mentioned meadows and the likes. To allow areas to grow wild in some ways, and some of it I've seen outside my own house. There's a park across the way, and I always wondered why they didn't cut the grass.
Now you know why.
And now I understand.
Yeah. But to give credit to the OPW and Board B, they've been very supportive of us.
So kind of it's a matter of explaining it to the rest of the population so that they understand, and that's where I think the funding needs to happen, so that it can be explained.
Can I ask Peter if he wants to say a few words, because he's the longest beekeeper among the lot of us here.
Just to say a few words on it. Peter Wilson, my name. I'm a South Kilkenny Beekeepers Association, and I started beekeeping in 1959. That's a good while ago. Now, with that, I just want to tell you, you asked the question how bad the thing has got since then. Beekeeping from about that up to the year 2000 has been fairly steady. Now, I had 24 hives of bees, stocks of bees in my apiary up to then. And, you know, I was doing okay by them. And there were plenty of food, there were plenty of foraging there. And I now have 6. I can only keep 6. It just goes to show you what's after happening. Where I was keeping 24, it's steadily going down, down, down. Now, as I said, it's all right for me, we'll say, as a beekeeper, to say that, this area is catered for 6 stocks, where it was 24. I'll put the balance in my car, and I might get an apiary from you or an apiary from the gentleman alongside you there, or from the chairman, and I'll spread them out. But the bumblebee or the solitary bee, they can't get into a motor car and drive off 20 miles down the road where they're a good area. They're going to be gone. I'm passionate about this. We're steadily, I count bumblebee. One of the things I was asked to do in 1957, 58, 59 when I was at school, I was taught by Mr. Dorn. He was the man that founded Machana Tuha, which was the forerunner to the Farmer's Club. He was the man that founded it. He gave me a project to do on bees, and he said, because I had no land, he used to give people with farmers' land, they might rear a calf and he would start them off. I had no land, nothing. So he said, OK, he said, I'll give you a job counting bumblebees, which I did. I'm counting bumblebees since. And whilst I was getting around on a certain hedgerow at a certain time, I have photographs in Everton, I can see that bumblebees have gone down by about 70%. We're in a serious problem. I'll tell you how valuable they are. I want to respond to this lady over here. She asked 2 questions, how valuable they are. In the spring of 2016, which is only 2 years ago, I had a phone call from a gentleman in Kilkenny. Hughes was the man's name. I don't know, I was on the phone to him, and he said, can you help me, he says. And I said, in what way? He said, can you send me up some bees? God, I said, we're after losing up to 70% of our bees because of lack of pollen over in the back end of 15, which was a very cold back end, and the start of 16. And I said, what's your problem? He said, I have 20 acres of pumpkins sown in the ground. And their man after coming into me, he said, this is the farmer put down these pumpkins. Their man after coming into me, and he said, have you got the bees to pollinate them? He didn't know they had to be pollinated. He didn't know. So I said, I'll get you a few hives of bees, but I can't get you much. I rang him, we'll say when the season was over at Christmas, and how did you get on? I got on well, he says. I got on well, but I have 100 acres. I'm going to send 100 acres from next year. I need some bees, he said. And he said, the bees, I had to import bumblebees down from Northern Ireland. And the bumblebee, he said, was 10 times better than the ordinary bee that we had for that particular job. I said, that don't surprise me, because the bumblebee will pollinate at a lower temperature than our bees. The bumblebee will pollinate around 10. we would have to, our bees have to be up around 15, 16 before they can do any pollinating. And bumblebees are crucial. Mr. Dorn told me that, God be good to him, in 1959, if anything happened to the bumblebee, we're in trouble. So you asked me a question there about the Kilkenny. I went into Kilkenny County Council 2 years ago. I was the head of the posse. And I asked Kilkenny County Council about this pollinator plan. They hadn't adopted it. You're right, they hadn't adopted it. But they adopted it then. And I asked them to do something for me, to highlight the whole situation. So they adopted the bumblebee, the black and amber bumblebee, as the insect for Kilkenny. And I asked them to do that. They took it on board and they have adopted it. Now, I did say last year, it's all right coming in and I'm gone and they have the bumblebee adopted. I want to see what they're doing. So they said they were going to put a plan in place. So I waited until the local election was over. I went to my councillor to know what have they done, like about various verges along motorways and all that kind of a thing. There's a lot of work that could be done there. But if something is not done quickly, we're going to lose the whole lot. And once they're gone, remember, we have the power to destroy them. We have the power to eliminate them, but we haven't the power to get them back. And like I said when I went up to Kilkenny County Council, I got a bit frustrated. One day I was going around talking to myself around. I said, I'm only like a drop in the ocean. But I said, if all the drops make up an ocean, and if everybody done a little, it might be on the person with the hanging basket, leave a little bit of your garden, go wild. It's grand. Bring out your children and look at the bees and the butterflies. And without the bees, we'll have no birds, we'll have no nothing. So I'm delighted to get the opportunity of speaking here today, and I hope I answered your question how valuable those pollinators are to the humans. And I'm heartened because the people, I'm afraid the people will say around the 40 and 50, they're not taking it serious, but the people below that in the schools are taking it very, very serious. I can tell you that. They're taking it very, very serious. And I have certain schoolmasters coming along and asked me to give various talks. So I'm thankful. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for the passion and an understanding of our responsibility. And it's a pity now, kind of maybe Kilkenny will do better now with after adopting in their hurling, after adopting the old symbol of the black and amber
This is Galway lad alongside of me.
I'm a Dublin man. We can beat Galway this weekend. So.
I'll give up the hurling if we can save the bumblebee.
Okay.
And I'll ask the gentleman over there. He might be able to.
I think just to fast track it, we might undertake to write to the councils here ourselves, so that the committee will write asking them what action have they taken, and any practical steps like that you think we can take. I'm willing as the chair to put that to the members over the next while. So if you're coming across a stumbling block and you think our intervention would be useful, just ask. And I think that's not as much as we can do, but the least that we can do.
It would certainly help ignite, the very interest that you're trying to ignite. If we could help you get them, to ignite their interest in it and make sure that it's happening. I mean, if Louth can do it so well, as you suggest, Ken, if they can do it so well, why can't others, And it's all very well to adopt a plan, but that can be in language, but you have to adopt it in action as well. So I would be very much in favour of that, Chair.
I allow Deputy Ó Cuív in, because I have to go very soon, and I want to get a photograph again with yourselves, kind of just beforehand, so I'll talk to Ó Cuív.
Before now, I was tied up with something else. I have a few questions. My understanding is, looking at the documentation you provided, and what was said to me when you were coming in, that in parts of the country cutting of hedgerows is a major issue. Now, where I live, particularly where I live in the west of Ireland, but in large swathes of the west of Ireland, in fact, there's very, very little hedgerow cutting, and any hedgerow cutting is quite cursory. It's along the roads, it's done by the County Council, it's not the inside hedges, and it's only on the outside of the outside hedges, and it tends to be more vertical than lateral. And certainly, even in the time I've been in Cornamona, there's a lot more hedges in the west of Ireland, a lot higher hedges than there were previously. And these tend not to be, they're deciduous, in other words, or they're white thorn, or the traditional hedges. And I think it's fair to say, if you drive, particularly this year was a great year for white thorn. You drive the roads, the whole thing across the place of white thorn, with plenty of gorse, and there'll be more gorse than there ever was, and so on. And in fact, there's more land disused than there would have been 40, 50, 60 years ago. So I suppose the first question is, are we getting areas of the country that, if the hedgerows are thriving, that the bees are thriving? Right, and that's question number one. And question number two, I remember it had been pointed out to me many years ago that the massive change in farming and farming balance and farming patterns, from a multicultural approach in terms of doing a bit of sowing, oats would have been popular, potatoes, vegetables, people keeping some fruit and so on, just to producing grass, and more grass, and more grass, because that's what they were getting paid to do. Has that had a negative effect on what you're talking about? So what I'm saying is, in the areas where the hedges haven't been cut, to be large swathes of the country, and where actually you have a lot more cover now than you ever had, and you have a lot of more wild flowers not being cut, nothing being cut. Are we seeing that those areas are thriving in terms of bees, and that the areas where there's wholesale mechanical cutting by the farmers themselves, with sophisticated mechanical cutters that can cut every side of the hedge, up and down and across, are we seeing a difference in the number of bees in those areas? And as I said, the second thing is, how much is the changing in farm practice having an effect?
I'll answer that for you. Thank you, Éamon. You were out of the room the first time. What's happened in the dairy belt, from Athlone to Cork and from that region of the country, is that the hedgerows are being cut down to the inch of their life. They're being taken right down to the stock root, and then the diggers are actually breaking the stock as they're doing it, and the hedgerows are not recovering. I also live in the west of Ireland, in the same town as yourself in Galway, and the hedgerows are good in Galway, the fields are good in Galway, but the wind coming off the sea keeps the bees busy trying to fly directly in a straight line. But I'm really talking about from Athlone to Cork and the dairy belt.
But what I'm asking is...
Yes.
I mean, the wind was always the same. And if anything, the cover's better now, right? And places like where I live are inland. They're not right in the sea.
Well, the west of Ireland, when I started...
It has to be population...
It has to a degree. In our own association in Galway, we'd set up 5 years ago, we had 14 members. We now have 100 members. That's 100 new beekeepers have come into our area. So yes, technically, the bee population in the west of Ireland has increased, but that's down to the work that we're doing on the ground.
But in other words, can you prove by comparing one against the other the direct relationship between the hedge cutting that's going on?
Yes.
The population of bees.
In our area, we're able to, if you take a beehive, we count it by the number of supers as how much honey will come into that hive. In the west of Ireland, we're still getting 2 or 3 supers per hive. When we get the right summer, like we've had last year, this year. But if you take Peter, who's down the other end of the country, he might have had 5 or 6 supers on years ago. He's barely getting 2.
And the second question. Has the drift towards monoculturalism and...
Absolutely. You have vast tracts of grassland, and they're heavily nitrogen and heavy manure, so it's just pure grass. There's nothing there. And if I was to say to you, if you were a bee and put yourself in a bee's shoes, you only can fly 3 miles to get food. And if you're flying over grass, which is no food, you suddenly starve.
Now, can I make a suggestion, Chair? Because I think solutions are always more. One, by the way, on a side note, it's nothing to do with directly with bees, but it's interesting. I was out in Inishbofin on the weekend, and there'd been a significant revival in the concrete population on the islands off the west coast. Now, part of what caused their demise actually was the lack of farming when the islands became depopulated, and changes in farming practice as well. In some cases, it was just pure depopulation, strangely enough. But what we do see is a very significant revival. And I was listening to Heydon and Gaeltacht, and they're apparently getting it done in Ballinirterig recently. The concrete making a comeback. So it shows if you change the circumstances, the game's not over. Because now, one of the suggestions I would make that we would write to the Minister of Agriculture and CC the Agriculture Committee here, because I have wanted for years and years and years that as a special measure under what's now GLAS, what was REPS and whatever, and this is all up for negotiation because after 2020 a new plan comes in, that instead of making it that the best money to be earned out of environmentally friendly farming was to put the thing in grass and do nothing and just keep the grass cut, that in fact there would be €1,000 or €2 paid to people to have kitchen gardens, in other words to recreate more traditional diverse farming, and that you get paid, and with small mechanical devices a lot of the hard labour can be taken out of having a half-acre spuds or vegetables or whatever. Would it be a help if there was an to me, the environmental schemes we have, the GLAS schemes and so on, there are good features in them, but they tend to lead towards monoculturalism, right? Because it's easier to get your money if it's simple. And what I wanted was that there would be a measure, just as they had the trading shoe measure where you injected the fertiliser and reduced fertiliser use, that there would actually be a specific measure for diversity in terms of crops. Now, I know that in the tillage areas that they had these, what do they call these areas that you set aside and you let go
set
away?
Aside for bumblebees and areas of sand.
Whatever. Well, what I'm saying in the other areas, we actually need a little bit of tillage or planting of various types. And would you be supportive if we suggested in the new environmental programme it would be much more?
Be very supportive of that. We'd also be very supportive of what we have already, not to lose. Not to lose what we have. And I reiterate this, the hedgerows, yes, they have to be cut and managed, but they should not be removed. And we have photographic evidence of fields that were there 3 years ago.
We wouldn't see that, as you know, in the West.
Oh, no, on the West is perfect, but I'm going to give you what the other end of the country is. It's gone. And all we want is that to be saved, protected. And the only way to do that is bring out some kind of rules as to how to cut them, not to remove them. They're doing it by stealth. Anyway, but I agree with you. We need to open up the countryside to other than monocultures.
So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest you add to your list.
We will look at that for the next meeting.
Very good.
Okay, and Dr. Scanlon, do you want to say a few words or ask questions? No?
Deputy Murphy.
Oh.
I know, that's not correct. Chair, I'm not going to hold it up too long. It's just I was held up with other things and I just happened to see part of the debate from my office, and I think it's absolutely fantastic that within the confines of this House we are discussing such important issues. Now, one or two very short questions. Probably you've touched on them before, so I'll do it a short answer. I mean, I have a background in horticulture, so I know a lot about, well, I know a little about it. I won't say I know a lot about how important all of this debate about bees is. But the thing that really disturbs me out there is that so many people still laugh at you when you talk about the importance of the bee for human beings. And this is a huge problem. Now, we often see, you know, environmental ads about different things. And what about an awareness campaign on TV and radio and social media about, you know, getting serious about the importance, particularly of the bumblebee. Mr. Walsh, I heard you about the black and amber. I live in a town called Strokestown, and we have black and amber there as well. We don't call it Kilkenny, we call it Strokestown. But on a more serious note, to, you know, because there is, young people are great, the school's fantastic, the teachers are really good in the schools, but there is a problem with a lot of society who laugh at this and think it's sort of, you know, airy-fairy stuff that we're discussing. So, I mean, I'm talking basically about awareness. How do you think we could improve it? If we could get the relevant department in government to fund an awareness campaign, would you think that would be a good idea?
Absolutely. I'm going to answer this in two ways to give a bit of positivity. When I started with the beekeeping, I might have been invited to one school once every 2 years if I was lucky, and I'd go in and they'd look and they'd get horrified when they see bees. For the last few years when I always go to the 8-year-old classes. I do 6 schools in my district, and when I go in, the kids and the children are not terrified of bees. They know more about bees than I ever did at their age, and they're hugely positive, and they ring me and contact me about when they see a bumblebee or something wrong. So the positivity is there with all the youth. Have it. They understand it. We see them on the streets protesting about the earth and the climate. They're ahead of the game. We're only catching up as elderly adults, for want of a better word. We missed the game here a few years back. So they're very positive. This is the first time we've been asked to any Dáil or Oireachtas house to speak about the bees, so I thank you for that. That's the first chance ever. As I said to you, I represent 3,500 members of the Federation of Irish Beekeepers. It's a voluntary organisation, and we get a pittance of 8,000 a year to keep it running. And we have to do all that. We do 2 surveys every year for the government, and that's where most of our money gets wrapped up. We don't have any bee health inspectors. We don't have any bee support inspectors. In England, you have bee support. So instead of going to your vet, you go to your bee fella and say, hi, I've got a problem with the bees. They do that. Now, we do get free testing from the Department of Agriculture, pay for health inspections on our bees. We send samples, and that we used to pay for that, and the last 2 years it's been free. So that's a slight positivity. But there's a lot of money coming into the country from research and everything else, but we don't get it on the ground. And as I said, 3,200 beekeepers, each one would have up to 3 or 4 hives, and each hive is about 60,000 bees. So we're doing our bit. Support, yes we do. This is the first opportunity to talk to government representatives at an equal level. We thank you for that. We'd like to get more media attention, but we don't know. As I said, we're voluntary. We try our best. Ken, fair play to him, is running around ragged. I used to do his job. And the late Philip McCabe, you've all met him, and God rest his soul, he's gone. He was the president of Appamonde, an Irishman. So we have done our best, but we're hand-tied because we are a voluntary organisation and we're trying to get there.
Okay. Chairman, I'm not going to hold it up any longer. Most of the other questions have been asked. Thank you very much.
We can hear the passion.
Thank you.
I think in this committee, if you didn't understand before now, we understand now kind of how important it is. Hopefully today's session gets the publicity it deserves. You've laid it out quite well. Hopefully we will be able to impact on both the Agriculture Committee, Agriculture Minister and the councils. I presume that the next pollination plan is already in hand, and kind of we will try and encourage whatever help can be given to you on that. And hopefully you'll be able to come back to us in a few years and tell us that we've managed to start or to address the decline at the very least, and to start the increase, but it will take quite a number of years, I think, and you have great work.
I'd like to ask you though, it'd be nice to come back here again next year and see how we progress with your help as well.
We wouldn't have a problem, kind of, and we've encouraged. We're just not sure whether we're going to be here next year.
Here.
Yeah, that's the nature of this job.
And I don't know if I'll be here either.
Well,
I might not be elected. We all have that problem.
So, while I'm stad seo an sin an crinu Creaichnú agus bhfuil Achahar mo bhuicas a gháil le ionadaithe ó Cóim Cumann Bacari na Héireann, the Irish Federation of Irish Beekeepers Association. I don't thank you for your contributions to the committee today. Very valuable contribution. So the meeting is adjourned until Tuesday, Martin Tarna Law the Yule, Tuesday the 2nd of July at 2 o'clock. Cora Margaret on Crinu Law.